Good afternoon, everyone. We will now reconvene the regular council meeting of the Township of Cappamonigan at 1 o'clock. There is no report from closed session, so we'll move right to number 7.1 on the agenda. Our first delegation, Mr. George Rabb, unopened Ann Street Road allowance. Mr. Rabb, if you want to just come to the mic and press it, and it should light up before it goes red, and then just press it again to turn the mics back to us when you're done speaking.
There we go. All right. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Deputy Mayor, and Council and Chief Administrator. I was a little nervous doing this. I'm not used to making presentations, but the reason I'm here again is I don't know if you had a chance to read through the paperwork, but this has been like an ongoing story here for getting on 5 years. And when I initially applied to made a presentation to council to buy this unopened and unused road allowance, which is the only access to this separately titled lot that I have, and which I, use as access as has been used for many years before. There was a house on that property before, and I have like an affidavit from, the previous owners, and I got the property like 30 years ago. The foundation house was there, and so there is it does provide access, and also, as it turns out, by municipal law, it provides me access to this lot that I have, because it's the only access I have. I did buy using a Freedom of Information, find out what that initial appraisal was 5 years ago, and the appraisal was for $10,000, for the unimproved road allowance, and the appraisal went on to say that the best use for this property, and I can. I'm going to read through the letter, but it recommended that the only and best use for the property was to join it with the attached lot, because it had no other purpose. There's no one else who could have interest in it. I tried as well to get this legal statement, but Freedom of Information wouldn't allow me to, and council can ask for that to see. My hunch is it says the same thing. So, in good faith at that time, it was a road allowance. And then many years later, and I continued, I have reams of letters and documentations, as, Ms. Early will attest to, trying to follow up on this and what's happening. But staff did not agree with the recommendations from the, the appraiser, nor I think from the lawyer, and said, no, we shouldn't sell this because it's of no advantage. It's no benefit to us. And also, it could provide access to Mr. Rabb's larger lot, which is not even on that title or not even attached to the road allowance, but beyond it. And so, I couldn't figure that out. And actually, just before I came here, I was flipping through minutes of council meeting last month, and there was Mr. Jameson, who was, had 2 road allowances, and he wants to create lots, to sell in Mount Pleasant and on County Road 10. And council at that time said, no, we don't even need an appraisal. It's agricultural land. Why don't we just get a ballpark figure of what it's worth and do it? And in my case, they're looking at my land and saying, oh, this land is valuable because George can profit from it. It'll become a building lot, or maybe it'll provide access to develop his property. So it's not in our best interest to sell it to him. And I didn't know that council was in, here on one hand, and other road allowances as well, council had sold them to adjacent properties, and often just for the cost of, the out-of-pocket expenses. And all of a sudden, it's not in the township's best interest to sell me this unopened road allowance, which provides the only access to my lot, because maybe in the future, it could be something more. And to be honest, I can't even tell the difference. I mean, whether that lot has frontage or not, it's still in the way of getting onto the property. So even if the township retains that road allowance, they still have a private lot to go through before, any developer down the road, God forbid, that would develop my land, still has to deal with getting through this private lot, which the road allowance dead ends on. So the whole idea of, it's not in our best interest, I don't understand. But anyhow, the reason I was making the request is, my son is moving back to Millbrook, and, I'm hoping that, he could build nearer to us. He just had his 3rd kid yesterday, so it was exciting. So I feel, you know, after going through all of this, you know, and then I was called in, and then, you know, I made another presentation, and council said, let's get it reappraised. So it was reappraised, and lo and behold, now it's $280,000 because the appraiser, I feel, and something that I've been back and forth about, I don't think he was given all the information, you know. So even in the description that he used, he would say things like, you know, the property runs from the back of here to where the fence is, and there's a big difference. The property is like not even 50 feet wide, you know, and the fence, you know, where the creek is like 300 and some odd feet away. So, you know, that I, you know, looked at all the things as well. There's a Coldwater Creek. It's like 80% in natural heritage. And it doesn't quite meet them in square footage because it still doesn't have both services. It has only one service, water. It doesn't have sewer yet. And yet it was appraised top dollar as if it was ready to go, a building lot. The road allowance hasn't even been stocked up yet. And that this would have come out at that point when the township said, let's make it a building lot. You know, we just, at first you have to stop it, or, you know, stop it off. And then none of that was done. You know, had that been done at that time, I would say, wait a minute, you can't do that. And then it would have avoided all of this. So this has gone on. And then, you know, whatever I did, I mean, I, you know, wrote letters to, to Wayne, wrote letters, everybody saying, you know, this just doesn't make any sense, you know, and to no avail, you know, it just kept carrying on and on. And so I feel like in a way that even if it was a building lot and the overriding thing I was told by, Richard Taylor is a very well-respected lawyer. He's the city of Peterborough lawyer and big, does work for a lot of municipalities. He said, it doesn't, the environmental, whether it can be a building lot or not environmentally, and there's a lot of issues with that because of where it is, the proximity to the Coldwater Creek and all of this other stuff. And the natural heritage zoning, he said all of that is secondary to the fact they can't stop it up. They cannot block you. You have a right, to have access to your property, and they just can't do that. So that's what I tried and went back to the township lawyer, and he said, yes, we can. So that's where we stand, and I've been doing this because I'm trying to avoid, I'll pay for the lawyer. But I just feel like I'm paying it through you as well. Like I'm paying on both sides. And I feel like something just doesn't make sense. How can two, supposedly well-respected, township lawyers, one says yes, one says no. But when I look at the way the appraisal was done without, the appraiser was not even told there was another property that had rights, so of course they went and they said, well, he treated it like it was just flat land and, and could be built on without any encumbrances. Well, there were encumbrances, and that was my access, so, all right, let me see. So some of the questions that I had, and I thought that I would explain, because, I'll stick to, I guess I made my point that I just don't understand why council never voted not to sell me the property. And then initially, everything was fine. And the recommendations were selling the property. Staff said, no, it's not in our best interest. And it just dragged on and on and on. And council said, well, we totally agree with staff. Let's vote to not sell them the property. Well, that didn't happen. It just kept going. And then I provide, affidavits, and I had to do all the research and consult with all these other people. And everyone said, this makes no sense to us, what they're doing. So anyhow, so one of the, I thought I'll just point out a few things. I don't know if you had a chance to read it, but in the McLean appraisal report, there's sort of it's set up like a question and answer kind of thing. And, with the issues and stuff. And some of them are, are the rights and obligations associated with unopened rollouts, which would impact the appraisal, and yes, there are. And they constitute a, restraint with, my ability to access my property. And, were they considered by the appraisal? No, they were not. And, it goes on and on, about, the common law and rights and obligations and stuff. So, I come to you now and I figure, like, had this thing not dragged on for 5 years, in the meantime, of course, the minimum frontage for a road frontage, I mean, even if it could be a building lot, the minimum frontage did expand. And so now, maybe if all the dots and if the road allowance was closed and if it met all the environmental conditions, and if I said you can't do this and it was proven yes, you can in the end, then maybe, fine, but none of that happened. It was just jumped from, one thing telling me for 4.5 years, it's a road allowance and and the township understanding that. And then all of a sudden getting a real estate that says, how much is that really worth? And not giving them the whole parameters of what is involved with this road allowance. And then of course, he comes up with this. And then for council, I think to call me in, and say, oh, we've got the result of, the survey, and, say, here it is. You want it $280,000, because it's a building lot. Now, why would I buy a building lot? I have a lot, I'm just trying to get access to it. It just seemed that somehow on one hand, it just seemed like a way to, I don't understand why staff won't sell it, but I'm sure.
Yep, sorry, we've passed the 10 minutes, but I want to give you some time so council can ask questions. So just so council's aware, we do have a couple of things after, but there is a staff report where staff can address, their perspective on this code, and we're going to do those subsequently right after. There's a couple little formats for minutes there. So, but I want to give George the opportunity because we were provided that in advance. So thank you for providing that summary. So I want to give council the opportunity to ask George some questions before we get into the staff report. Is that okay? Perfect. Okay. No problem. So questions for George at this time. Councillor Byrne.
Through you, Chair. There's a lot of things here I'll ask of staff, but of your concern, have you ever refused to buy it at any point over the last 5 years? Has there been a conflict that way? Hang on.
Okay. Yeah, sorry. The only time I actually said I am not going to buy this was when I was offered it for $280,000. Then I said, I'm not spending that kind of money. This is insane. There was a point of time at the very beginning, and this is like 4 years ago, when I was told that, staff really doesn't want to sell you the property, and I said, well, what does that mean? And they said, well, it just means they don't want to. And I said, but, and then I was given the reasons why, the same thing. They didn't want, they were afraid it would give access to the larger property, which could be developed. And I don't know even why that would be a problem, and also that there was no benefit to the township to sell it to me. So regardless of whether I had, needed it for access or not. Yeah. So that was the only time. And at that time, I did mention to, I can't remember her name, the former clerk, but I mentioned to her, I said, look, if this is going to be kind of an impasse, I said, my son is still working out east and stuff. I'm willing to, let it sit for a while. But do I have a guarantee that it can't be sold? And I was told, and I think it was even Wayne Garrett told me, and I have a letter that lot can never be sold because at that time, first it didn't have the frontage, and it, because also he said it provided access. And the same thing happened when the neighbors were asked if they want the property. They couldn't buy, that whole section behind their property. They could only buy half. So the problem with them is who wants to spend money for a survey and for legal fees to register a 20-foot wide extension of their slip. And then Karen Ellis mentioned that we wouldn't allow that anyhow. We wouldn't want like this, fragmented piece of a road allowance. Why would we ever allow that? So, that was sort of a non-starter. So no, I never stopped. And if I can give you my string of emails regularly for 5 years, saying, what's going on here? And I was surprised. When council said we should get another appraisal, there was one done with recommendations that, sell it to the adjacent property. It's of no value to anyone else. Sure.
Other questions, members of council? Deputy Mayor Huntley.
Through you, Chair, to Mr. Hava, sympathetic to your plight here. This has been a long journey, absolutely. And I know in the last time you were here, we made the recommendation to get the appraisal done to see what it was. And so, I mean, we did that. We did that to you, I guess, is the proper way of putting it. And to be completely honest, I'm flabbergasted that it came back at, you know, over almost $300,000 for that vacant lot. So I'm interested to hear from the staff report kind of how it went from 10 to 300, you know, and if that makes any sense whatsoever. So.
But from their reports, I mean, they obviously were not told that, you know, they were not told there's encumbrances on this lot, both environmental and by common law, you know, by municipal law. So they just treated it like, well, it meets the minimum frontage, which had changed, you know, since the first appraisal. And a lot in Millbrook at that time, and that was the high end appraisal for, because if you look at the lot, I mean, it's basically, I mean, as I said, it's, you know, less than 50 feet wide. And it's the neighbors have been piling brush on there for decades. In the microphone. So it's not even. So, you know, it's not like this is flat, ready to build lot with the services, the sewer and the water and everything there. It's a problematic piece, and I don't know if it could ever even be a building lot, but that's not the issue. The issue is all of a sudden council decided that it was a building lot and it could be sold to anybody for that price. You know.
I got to intervene for a second because that's making a statement that's inaccurate and is in no way factual. Council hasn't given any sort of direction to call anything about. We have retained an independent appraiser to appraise the lot. That was what council's direction to staff was. Council has not made any decisions about what is or is not a building lot. That is not our jurisdiction. That is not our role, nor is it staff's role. So let's just be careful. I also take offense to the suggestion that there was some manipulation as to what an independent appraiser was provided. Well, that's what was stated. So I'm just trying to clarify. So backing up a second. So just to clarify for everyone, because Deputy Mayor Huntley and I were there for the previous iteration, so we're just more familiar. What was approved was an exclusive opportunity for you alone to purchase the new, whatever valuation the independent auditor or the independent appraiser came up with. You were afforded a unique opportunity with no unfettered competition from the marketplace to purchase this lot. That is still the case. That was what the appraiser came back with, which we understand a lot has changed in the planning horizon over the last 5 years. Mr. Connolly's got a report of things that have changed in the last 4 months. Some of those are not even accurate, as we'll find out later. So the planning horizon changes on a dime and has never changed faster. That is not a municipal control. That is not a council decision. We are at the mercy of keeping our legislation and all of our zoning as consistent with provincial policy statement. That's our job, and we are doing things in this meeting to keep up and keep in coherence with those applications. That is not a municipal council direction or a staff will or interest. We are bound as creatures of the province to have our legislation and our zoning consistent with all the rules that they provide us with. But that's case in point. The other component to it is that this exclusivity of this exclusive opportunity, we didn't know what was going to come back from the appraiser. That's why it was done by an independent contracted person to do this work. They were not fettered with any controlling information. They were limited and had to keep up with the evolution of the planning horizon of what is and is not a building. That is something that staff, I'm sure, will provide more clarity, and I know that this council will have questions about when we get to the report from Ms. Ellis and Mr. Connolly. So I just need to let's just the facts, and let's just stay on point, because I think I want to give council the opportunity to ask those questions, but I won't allow statements that are untrue to be on the record unchallenged at this point. And I think we understand it's a frustrating and it's a sensitive subject. Congratulations on another grandchild. Obviously, there's emotions are running high. So let's just try to have cooler heads. But you know, we are here to make certain decisions based on the facts, and I don't want it to get ugly, and I want it to be above board. So
all I said is that I don't think that the appraiser was given all the facts when he did the appraisal, and that's obvious in his appraisal. And And I don't know whose responsibility that is. That's not maybe not council's, but staff's, and there's a connection. The other thing is I don't, I don't for any way think that, something, sinister or anything was happening. But the fact is that whether it was only my special, opportunity, the property was being evaluated as if it was on the market at a value. So that can't be taken away. And the third thing is that even with all the municipal changes and the bylaws and zoning and everything that goes on, there is one law that remains consistent and constant, and that is you cannot block access to the egress for a property owner to be able to access his property. And that has not changed. And that is part of the municipal law. So that's the only thing I'm saying. Yep.
And I know that that has been the information you received from retained legal counsel, but I know having our own legal counsel that there is, what a surprise. The lawyers say what the person pays them wants to say. And unfortunately, we have a legal disagreement between two council representatives. Unfortunately, those are all too common these days. But, we will make that consideration. And if there's no other questions, we can jump ahead to the report. But Jerry has a question, so I'll go to Councilor Byrne.
Through the chair to the chair. So at the point in time, because I'm only 4.5 days old on this topic, at what point in time did you give this exclusive offer, and to what steps did either staff or council or both do to the other 4 property owners that all touch this road allowance to say that you could offer a exclusive offer to one member?
So that was council's discretion. They are able to single source and provide this opportunity. There was an ongoing conversations with Mr. Rabb, who had expressed the most interest. But I can tell you personally that after that decision was made, I was contacted by those adjacent owners and was very disappointed that they weren't given the same opportunity to purchase land in a more public process. So that was a decision of council that we all as council members are bound to. And this is the finality of that process. So you can choose under certain conditions. I'm sure the CEO can elaborate on those conditions. This was one of those conditions that allowed us that opportunity to provide that single source opportunity. But I'll let Ms. Hurley or whomever speak to that more directly. Ms. Hurley, would you like to address that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to council, that is correct. Our disposition of land bylaw does give council the right to single source it. It is a council decision to do that if they wish to do that. But it's not a recommendation that staff usually go that direction. We actually ask that you follow the bylaw. However, during the discussion, I think part of it was that Mr. Rabb has gone before council. This is number 5th report. And in June of last year, there was never any decision to support Mr. Rabb's question or his ask, I should say, from all the other council reports. And then last year, June of last year, council gave a different direction, which was to single source it. And part of my report outlines that process and what took place.
Mr. Rabb?
There's a difference between the other adjacent property owners, and that is, and I think, as you say, Mr. Mayor, this is probably going to end up in the court, and we'll find out whether the municipality is allowed to landlock a property where, someone has been paying taxes for, God knows how many decades. We'll find that out in court. But I think that the fact remains with the adjacent property owners, a few things. One is, if they want to buy their piece, I was told by planning it would fragment, the road allowance. And assuming that I can't be blocked, illegally, they couldn't buy the whole width of the road allowance if they have. And the other thing is they have access to their properties. This road allowance is not something they need in order to enjoy and have access to their property. I'm the only one. That's the road allowance, the only property it can serve at this point is mine. I'm the only one who has an interest. And thank you.
Yep, Deputy Mayor.
Through you, Chair. I'm sorry, Mr. Rabb, you said any individual property owner could only buy half.
Ms. Hurley?
Sorry, through you, Mr. Chairman, Council, just for clarification, what Mr. Rabb is speaking about under the Municipal Act, that's where the two legal counsels have a different opinion. The Municipal Act changed, and there is no responsibility for a municipality to provide access to anyone's property. So that's the discrepancies between the two legal opinions, but as my understanding, the municipality is not responsible to provide access to anyone's property. There's lots of properties out there that actually are not, there's not access or frontage or whatever. But that is because of the change in the Municipal Act.
Hold on a second.
Sure. Oh, yeah. No, I'm
As well, we just have to be more.
Through the chair to the CAO. With what you just said, I'm wondering, I can see the government, whatever level, not being responsible to supply somebody with road access to a given lot somewhere in the province. Are they allowed to take it away?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to Council Byrne, I'm not aware of that answer. I can't give you that answer. Yeah, I can only suggest, I can only comment on what we've received from legal advice under the Act and what the current Municipal Act states. And it's about providing access to an individual's property, and it speaks to that. I can't speak to the other.
Mr. Rabb?
I think that's an excellent point, Councillor, because that's what we're talking about. We're talking about, I have existing rights, which I use to access that property, and the township is taking that away. I understand if that was a landlocked lot that had no road allowance, no public road coming to it, then I would say, fine, you don't have to supply it, but it exists and I've been using it. Thank you.
Ms. Hurley?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, just for clarification, the township is not taking away anything. The access can still be provided. The question is about selling the property.
Other questions, members of council, before we move on to the report? Seeing none, we'll look for a mover to receive the delegation. Deputy Mayor Huntley, Councillor Natchoff, all in favor? That is approved. Thank you, Mr. Rabb. We have a few minutes we'll approve here quickly, and then we'll get on to the staff report. Good discussion. Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you for providing the contents in advance so we can review it. That was very helpful. All right, moving on. We have two sets of minutes, but I believe we have to do them separately. So I will look for a mover to approve the minutes of the regular meeting on May 15th. Be approved as presented. Councillor Natchoff, Councillor Byrne, all in favor? That is approved. The second set of minutes is from the Cavan Public Library Board from the April 18th meeting. We received for information. Can I have a mover? Councillor Natchoff and Deputy Councillor Edgerton, all in favor? That is approved. Thank you very much. We are now at 10.1, the report, and I believe, is it Ms. Hurley or Ms. Ellis who was presenting this in today? Ms. Hurley.
Thank you. Just because there is a lot of questions and we did have a delegation with respect to Mr. Rabb as well. I think we should take the time to sort of go through the report, if you may. So if you would permit me that time. With regards to the recommendations in front of you, that council received report corporate services 2023 -01 unopened Ann Street road allowance for information, and that council retained the property known as and that council retained the property known as the unopened Ann Street road allowance. At the regular council meeting of June 20th, 2022, staff presented a report, corporate services 2022-10, and the recommendation that council passed is below, that council declare the land's unopened Ann Street road allowance, Millbrook surplus, to the needs of the township of Cavan-Monaghan. That's 1. 2, that council directs staff to carry out an independent appraisal of the unopened Ann Street road allowance in Millbrook. That council directs staff to negotiate directly with George Rabb on the sale of the unopened Ann Street road allowance, Millbrook, as per disposition of land bylaw number 2016-7, and that all legal costs and the appraisal be borne by the applicant, George Rabb, should Mr. Rabb agree to purchase an open Ann Street road allowance. So staff did reach out to McLean Simon to do an independent appraisal. That is correct. McLean Simon were also the ones that did the previous appraisal, so they had a lot of background on the property as well as site visits on the property. The appraisal came in at the time at $280,000. Since September 2022, there's been multiple discussions and correspondence between Mr. Rabb and township staff and legal advice on both sides. Mr. Rabb has concerns of the current appraised value property dated August 2022 compared to the previous appraisal that was dated April 2019. It's important to note that the appraisals are based on the information available at the time, conditions, property, recent sale, comparators, etc. The property is currently zoned urban residential type 1 RU1 zoned, and this natural linkage is on the property as well. And I would defer when it comes to the planning questions to Ms. Ellis, please, because she was very much involved in this. The property is zoned for UR1 and did have enough lot areage to satisfy the minimum lot requirement for private service lot. In 2022, the Director of Public Works confirmed that access to piped municipal water and wastewater services was now available. That is correct. At the original time, there was only water servicing, but not waste services. That changed in 2022. Mr. Rabb advised that staff and is not interested in the purchase of the $280,000. Ultimately, council has the sole discretion to make a final determination on the sale price similar to a real estate transaction. If the purchaser is not prepared to pay the price set by the vendor, the parties can go their separate ways. It's also important to note that staff's role is to carry out the direction and the motion of and explore the alternative options that would and not explore the alternative options. There is other options that could be considered, but the direction was very clear in June of last year that an independent appraisal go forward, and therefore that's what staff did. We did not look at any other alternative options, such as special agreements, etc. Mr. Rabb first approached the township back in 2019. However, council did not direct staff until June 2022. Just to point that the only time we did get the direction was at that time. Prior to that, there was a direction in 2019 to get an appraisal as an upset limit. That appraisal did go forward, but however, council did not make a decision at that time to go forward with commencing any type of transaction with Mr. Rabb. To date, we've spent this year, since June of last year, we've spent over $4,000 on this item so far. But I would like to defer to Ms. Ellis regarding the planning and the building on that property, sir.
Thank you, Ms. Hurley. There we are. Should we maybe defer to Ms. Ellis to answer some of the questions? I'm sure she is prepared to speak to a number of the items listed, and then defer the questions until after that. Is council good with that process? Very good. Ms. Ellis, are you prepared to speak to some of the issues outlined and provide some of the municipal context, please?
Through you, Mayor Graham, to members of council and members of the public. So the Ann Street Road allowance is currently, as indicated in Ms. Hurley's report, currently zoned urban residential 1 and natural linkage. In the urban residential 1 zone, residential uses are permitted. And as you're well aware, there are minimum lot frontage and lot area requirements. Given that public services in terms of piped water and wastewater services are now available to that lot, that property has enough lot area and frontage in the UR1 zone to permit the construction of a single detached dwelling. That is a significant change from when the original appraisal was done. At that time, full public services were not available and the property did not have enough lot area and lot frontage to permit the construction of a dwelling on private services. So that is a significant change in the time between the two appraisals. The property is regulated by the Conservation Authority. To be clear, and a permit would be required for any development activity on the property. However, please note that there is enough lot area and frontage in the UR1 zone to permit the construction of a dwelling. No planning application is required. So everything would be regulated under the Conservation Authority's regulatory framework in terms of permitting only. So an environmental impact study is not necessarily required. Realistically, there will be some technical information like the slope stability report, probably required because of the topography and the soils in that area, but there's not necessarily a requirement for an environmental impact study. So the fact that there is a creek located south of the property, there is an established natural linkage zone that is applied to provide the buffer. So just to be clear, that's how staff came to the determination that we believe it is a buildable lot. In terms of staff's position, so all along, I think that, and if I'm going to speak frankly, all staff does not agree on everything all of the time, but I think the Director of Public Works and I feel that we should hold on to it, and we do realize that and we're looking long term, like we're looking 30, 40 years out. That's from where staff is coming from. So the fact that the road allowance does run into Mr. Rabb's existing landlocked property, we get that. But there are tools available to the municipality to get access over that lot to the bigger piece, should that area be developed more intensely in the future. It's also staff's job to make sure that we, when the appraisal is done, it is based on the highest and best use for the property. We have a responsibility to all ratepayers within the municipality to the value gets set on what the highest and best use is. And in our opinion, at this time, based on information that it's service zoned, it could be a building lot.
Thank you, Ms. Ellis. One other thing, just for a point of clarity, just with regards to some of the comments in the delegation, with regards to the legal entitlement to access, that would only really be being removed from the proponent of the property owner should it maintain its surplus status with the intention of being sold to some other party. If it's retained, as is in the recommendation, it is still a road allowance. It is still providing public access to the property, and thusly nothing is actually being removed. So my question is, with regards to the previous motion that we're still executing and following through in today's discussion, it does specifically say, or explicitly say, declare the lands as surplus. Does the motion or the second recommendation of staff to retain the property undo that classification, or is there something further in the recommendations that are needed to remove the surplus designation or consideration that's been applied to the property for the purpose of this exploration?
Through you, Mayor Graham, to members of council, members of the public, I think the road allowance is there. It's a public road allowance today. It provides access. Any member of the public can walk on that. Like, obviously it's not in a state where you could drive on it. If you declare it surplus, it's still, until you sell it, it's still in the public domain and people would still have access to that property. Today, with the recommendation before you today, unless the clerk differs with me, I believe that you can change your mind, and with the adoption of the recommendation, you can choose to retain it under township ownership. And then should Mr. Rabb wish to have access over it, there are other options that you could maybe consider in the future.
So maybe I'll ask the clerk then, just for clarity, it has already, because it's been previously declared surplus, does the recommendation or the second recommendation in the report of, suggesting we retain the property, does that remove it from the declaration of surplus? Or would there be something else that needs to be done so that it's not theoretically on the open market or remaining as an opportunity that's now no longer exclusive to Mr. Rabb?
Through you, Mayor, to yourself and the rest of council, that's a good question. And my answer would be, based on the motion that was originally presented to council on June 20th, it was to retain it. Council's direction was to declare it surplus and negotiate with Mr. Rabb. Because that entire motion says that, my internal clerk soul says, because that will no longer be if you choose to take the motion that's in front of you, which would be to retain it, which therefore would no longer be to negotiate the sale directly with Mr. Rabb. So I think it depends. Ultimately, my heart says yes. If council chooses today to stick with the recommendation that's in front of you, it is no longer surplus because the negotiation was directly with Mr. Rapp.
Oh, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves. There's just a point of clarification with regards to the motions and just understanding exactly how all of that access is, it pertains to it. Questions, members of council, Deputy Mayor Huntley, and then Councilor Byrne.
Through you, Chair, to Ms. Ellis. I guess, I think Mr. Rabb's made it clear that he's not actually interested in building on that property itself. He wants to use that property to get to his landlocked property. Would his landlocked property, if he was to build now, be subject to water and sewers? Or would he be able to do an alternative system on that property?
Through you, Mayor Graham, to Deputy Mayor Huntley, members of council, and members of the public. The lot that Mr. Rabb owns today is landlocked, so a building permit is not available on that lot because it has no frontage on a public road. If the road allowance is, if an agreement is made and Mr. Rabb purchases the road allowance, connection to full public services is required. So under section 7.8A of the township's official plan requires all development in Millbrook to be connected to municipal water and wastewater system unless exempted by the township's official plan or the county official plan. And I could not see anywhere in the township's official plan that provided any exemption for the connection to municipal services for a new development. And further in section 7.8.1, just for your information, existing uses are encouraged to connect to full municipal services and are required to pay their full share of costs.
Thank you, Ms. Ellis. So just for clarity, if the property was to be purchased at this time, the cost of that infrastructure to build on that separate lot would be borne by the purchaser.
Through you, Mayor Graham, to members of council and members of the public, that is my understanding, yes.
Councilor Byrne, sorry. Or follow up, Deputy Mayor Huntley, or?
So through you, Chair, I guess the follow-up question then is if Mr. Rabb can't purchase that property, then there's no way of him obtaining a building permit for that landlocked piece of property. Is that how I interpret that?
Through you, Mayor Graham, to Deputy Mayor Huntley, members of council and the public, that is correct. Under the current zoning bylaw, when you have an existing lot of record that has no frontage on a public road, you are not eligible for a building permit. However, having said that, we're all aware that there are planning approval processes in place and anybody can apply for whatever they want, whenever they want.
Councilor Byrne?
Through the chair. So at what point in time, for clarity for me, did you declare this surplus property? And the company that did the recent appraisal did the original appraisal. And if I read it right, that was $10,000. I'm trying to figure out the time gap between 19 and 22. What changed that? Like why things didn't happen in 3 years there if it was already declared surplus? And why, when you make the comment that we're looking 30 years out, are we retaining something that you already previously said was surplus sometime in the past and I have no idea when?
So I can provide so as it says in the overview of the report, these were not declared surplus until we were given the direction to exclusively negotiate with Mr. Rapp. That June 20th, 2022. So they were never declared surplus prior to then. There was an approach about a request for consideration and purchase. In order for them to be eligible to be purchased, they need to be declared surplus in order to be consistent with our bylaw and their disposition bylaw. So that's sort of the structure. It wasn't previously declared surplus. So I hope that provides a bit of clarity. Seeing none. So this is a very difficult circumstance. Obviously, we all are aware of, I think, council has seen a number of lot severances and things of the like, and we're all familiar with the costs of a severance. And it's unfortunate that the timeline has unfurled as it has, but when I consider all of the components in play here, I don't believe it's in the township's best interest to declare it a surplus because of the future horizon and planning for road allowances in the service settlement area that is in the village of Millbrook. And we do have a fiduciary responsibility to the ratepayers to manage the assets that we do own as a municipality. I might also disagree with the $280,000 valuation, especially when you compare it to some of the proposed usage that Mr. Rabb is intending to use it for. However, there's probably, I still have no belief that a $10,000 and change component would remotely reflect the value. And so I'm really kind of bound between one rock and one very hard place. And I don't have the expertise or would feel confident with coming up with some ad hoc valuation to make some alternative proposal at this time. So with that context, I feel as though the recommendations are sound. And with the clarification that we'll need to address with number 2 to ensure that these lands are being removed from no longer declared surplus. So that would be an amendment to that recommendation that I think I would feel more confident from a council standpoint in ensuring that this is no longer declared surplus, that we're not going to be entertaining these exclusive opportunities anymore with regards to this property, and that access because of that retention is still provided and to Mr. Rabb for that property and the future development therein. So we have 2 recommendations before us. If there's no other comments, we have to need a recommendation, but a question from Councillor Byrne first.
Through you, Chair, just because I thought there might be other things being addressed. When I look at this overview on page 32, the aerial kind of glance, I don't know how accurate it is. I'm trying to figure out in my head the last few days what the original plan was for Millbrook. Looks like there's another road allowance across the road, the same dimensions. It looks like all the other road allowances to the north either weren't in play or whatever, because the road doesn't seem to be centered. And I'm trying to figure out what maybe back 100 or 150 years ago, kind of like downtown Millbrook, what the master plan was actually supposed to be and how it got so far off track. Because either one of those allowances that go east or west off of Main Street there, I'm just trying to figure out why they were there and how they're supposed to be useful moving forward.
Through you, Mayor Graham, to Councillor Byrne, members of council and the public. So even though I've been around a long time, I was not around when the original Millbrook plan was put in place, but it's kind of set out for the most part in a standard grid pattern with road allowances set at a standard distance apart. I understand from Mr. Rabb that at one point in time, this road allowance did provide access to a house. But in the last 30 years, I don't think that access has been provided. It hasn't been opened. We see it quite a lot with old plans of subdivision, and Mr. Rabb in his presentation did make reference to the Jameson situation in Mount Pleasant, where old road allowances were set out at the time, but standards have changed in terms of health and safety. Like in Mount Pleasant, you're on private well and septic. So at one time, like a 1/4 acre lot probably was okay, but now we're looking at 3/4 to an acre being the minimum size. So standards have changed over time, but I think this was laid down in what appears to be a standard grid pattern, given some of the topographical constraints and the environmental constraints, and they're just set out at a regular interval. Although in this particular area of Millbrook, it's a little messy because of the water courses, but it's just, that's the best answer I can give you.
Councillor Byrne?
Through the chair. So how accurate? So the houses are on both sides of the black line. Are they on either side of different lots, or is that just simplification that shows up?
Through you, Mayor Graham, to Councillor Byrne, members of council and the public. So to be clear, I should have clarified this in the beginning. This air photo is not always technically and legally correct. So the lot lines you're seeing are not accurate. So quite often you'll see that the air photos that we use do look like the lines cross through a house. That is not real. The houses are located, I believe, for the most part, almost always, on the lot that is legally owned by the people. So it's just the laying of the lot lines over the air photo.
Thank you, Ms. Ellis. Deputy Mayor Huntley?
Thank you, Chair. Through you, I guess it might be a clerk question. Get your clerk hat on. So if this recommendation goes through, are we essentially hitting reset on the whole situation on Ann Street? Like we've taken away Mr. Rab's exclusivity to it. We've reset it back to being retained property. But if another offer came in from Mr. Rab or from one of the other adjacent property owners, would it have to be undone by the mover and the seconder of this council? Or would it have to wait to the entire next council before it can even be addressed?
Ms. Page.
Through you, Mayor, to Deputy Mayor and the rest of council. So ultimately, it would go back to our disposition of land bylaw. It would go back to our original recommendations as that we want to retain it, which we have stated that position since 2019. It would then fall to ultimately restart the exact process. They would submit the application to the clerk. The clerk would go through, we'd meet it with staff, and we would probably say the same thing to the applicant. We are not interested in selling this property. We'd like to retain it. They would then have the right, just like Mr. Rab did, to come and present the delegation to council, which is what's created the situation. So each of the reports, as council has gone through them, staff have maintained the same position, which is to retain this property, to not sell it. It was not until that motion was overridden at the June 20th meeting that council directed staff to declare this a surplus and to do direct negotiations with Mr. Rab. Staff did not, that was not staff's recommendation within that report, as you will see throughout the chain of it, that's attached within the report here. So ultimately, yes, it would reset it. And then that's the next steps that it would go through. We break for council.
Deputy Mayor Huntley.
Through you, Chair, then. So just for clarity, it would not prohibit Mr. Rab or anybody else from coming forward to this council and having a first or second or reverse this decision today.
Based on the procedural bylaw, that's within any right. They can amend that. They can ask you to override that. Absolutely.
Councilor Byrne.
Through the chair to the clerk, just so I'm clear, 2019 timeframe was when you, as staff, recommended it to be retained?
So just to be clear, staff have. Sorry, that's my fault. For some, in all five, I believe this is the fifth reports, staff has always recommended that the property be retained.
So therefore, in 2022, council recommended and went ahead with deciding to have exclusive offer. And was I correct earlier? What was the original estimate done by the same company around 10,000 back in 1918, whatever? Yeah.
And through you, Chair, to Mr. Byrne, Ms. Ellis has clarified what the change was. When the appraisal was done in 2019, it was not buildable, and that was the time change.
Questions, members of council? So the report is before us with the recommendations as they're in. We entertain a mover and a seconder for those recommendations. Councilor Natchoff. I'll be the seconder. Call for a vote. All those in favor of the recommendation, sorry, I should clarify this with regards to the second part of the recommendation. Do we need to change the verbiage to remove it from the surplus list? Or are you confident as the clerk that that intention is captured in the language?
Through Mr. Mayor, I'd feel more comfortable if we added a third recommendation and said that the unopened Ann Street road allowance no longer be declared surplus.
Very well. So there were three recommendations on the table for consideration now. So we'll call for a recorded vote.
I can recap the motion that's in front. It's all three motions so that council receive report corporate services 2023-07 unopened Ann Street road allowance for information, and that council retain the property known as unopened Ann Street road allowance. And the third recommendation is that the unopened Ann Street road allowance no longer be declared surplus. Your mover is Councillor Natchoff and your seconder is Deputy Graham. So pardon me. It's been a while. My apologies, Mayor Graham. I was looking at the Deputy Mayor. Sincere apologies. So the first vote I'm calling for is Councillor Edgerton.
Oh, yes.
Councillor Natchoff.
Yes. Yes.
Deputy Mayor Graham. Sorry, Deputy Mayor Huntley.
No.
Mayor Graham,
Yes.
and Councillor Byrne.
Before I vote, I'd just like a little clarity and the CA was going to give it.
Ms. Hurley?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to Council Byrne. The question, Mr. Byrne would like to, Councillor Byrne would like to hear the three recommendations again. So could you just pause for a second? The two are in front of you. The third one. Madam Clerk, could you read the third one, please?
The third recommendation is that the unopened Ann Street road allowance no longer be declared surplus.
Yes.
Votes carried.
Thank you very much. Not an ideal situation, but thank you, council, for moving forward, and we will continue on with the agenda. Moving on to 10.2, report finance 2023-06. Yes, yep. 2023-06, tax levy special services and BIA bylaws. Kimberly, Ms. Pope.
Thank you, Mayor Graham. Through you to all of council, I have before you that council receives the information and approves the tax rate levy, special services levy, and BIA bylaws, including the schedules as attached as per the Municipal Act. And just for clarification purposes to our new council, this is a standard annual process in order to incorporate the passing of the budget at the county level and their tax rates, the education rates, and our own that you approved in February, all consolidated into the new tax rate, which will appear on the property tax bills going out the first week of July from this municipality.
Thank you, Ms. Pope. So this is a municipal requirement under the Act. Any questions about the contents of the report? Seeing if there is none, we can take a motion, but I'll pause for a second. Motion to accept, I'm just going to qualify, receive for information and approve the tax levy, special surpluses levy and BIA bylaws, including the schedules as attached under the Municipal Act. That is a motion from Deputy Mayor Huntley. Can I have a seconder? Councillor Natchoff, all in favor? That is carried. Moving on to 10.3, report 2023-26, Kennedy official plan and zoning bylaw amendments. Ms. Ellis.
Mayor Graham, members of council, planning report 2023-26 is before you today with the following recommendations. One, that council approve bylaw number 2023-42 to adopt official plan amendment number 13 to the township of Cavan Monaghan, should say official plan. Number two, that council authorizes submission of the adopted official plan amendment to Peterborough County for review and approval. And thirdly, that council approve bylaw number 2023-43, a zoning bylaw amendment to implement the policies of official plan amendment number 13 as presented. This is in a follow-up report to the public meeting that we held at the last council meeting. And at that time, there was one outstanding issue with regard to the minimum distance separation requirements. And we had information confirmed that, in fact, the new uses are low human occupancy and MDS does not need to be calculated. So in our opinion, the applications are suitable for your approval today.
Thank you, Ms. Ellis. Questions with regards to this has obviously been before council a number of times. I'm happy to see that the MDS has been satisfied and not going to be an impediment to this development. If there's no questions, we can take a motion and mover and a seconder for the three recommendations before us, and this can move on. Councillor Edgerton, is that a motion? All right, we have one. Councillor Natchoff for two. All in favor? That is approved. Thank you very much, Ms. Ellis. Moving on in our agenda to 10.4, 2023-27 Can Agra Services Merger Agreement. Ms. Ellis, you again.
Mayor Graham, members of council, planning report 2023-27 is before you today with the recommendation that bylaw number 2023-44 be approved to authorize the mayor and clerk to sign the merger agreement between Cavan Agri Services Limited, applicant, Cavan Agri Services Limited, purchaser, and the corporation of the township of Cavan Monaghan. This merger agreement will, I believe, finalize the last condition for approval of the lot addition. Once the lot addition is completed, staff can then move on finalizing the site plan approval application for the development of Cavan Agri Services.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ellis. Nice to see that this development is moving forward, and hopefully will bring more prosperity to a very significant employer in the township. Questions, members of the council? If we don't have any, we're looking for a mover and a seconder. Councillor Byrne, is that a question?
Not so much a question, Chair. I took a drive down and talked to the people on site and I didn't see anything that was out of line with, because they own both sides of the fence basically. And they're just trying to merge agricultural land into the other designation so they can expand their business. And they've been doing a good job of that for the last little while. So am I missing anything? Why this is even a problem? Or
Through you, Mayor Graham, to Deputy Mayor, not Deputy, to Councillor Byrne and other members of council, members of the public. So this application, you're quite right. They are transferring a portion of the agricultural piece to the Cavan Agri Services rural employment piece to facilitate the expansion. They have built some buildings already. They are looking to do some more work. So the additional land will permit that additional development to occur in compliance with the standard rural employment land uses. We do have a site plan application in place. We have processed it to a certain point, but we can't finish it until the lot addition is completed. In that interim, while we've been waiting, they have done some additional work, but we are working with them together to get everyone on the same page and in compliance.
So not so much an issue, just a formality and process that must be adhered to and gone through, but that's, again, it's a good news story and glad to see it moving forward. I believe we've talked about a mover and a seconder, but if there's no other questions, Councillor Byrne will move. We're looking for a seconder. Deputy Mayor Huntley, all in favor? That is approved. Moving on further in the next report is 10.5. PEB 2023-28, Bill 109 and Bill 23, Official Plan and Zoning Bylaw Amendments Report. Mr. Connolly. John, I believe, and I have a note here that there are amendments to the bylaws that we will be discussing today that are recent and weren't attached in the documents and provided to council and posted. So can you provide some clarity on that, please?
Through your worship to council and members of the public, you have before you report PEB 2023-28. And again, as you're indicating, the changes that are being brought forward were changes that should have been part of the original package, but refined based on actually looking through it from staff, and Ms. Ellis had an application which sort of begged that this clarity be provided in the zoning bylaw amendment. So the only changes before in the package for council is that the zoning bylaw amendment that is before council today be very clear and very specific as to when you can have within serviced urban areas 2 accessory apartments versus outside serviced urban areas. So that clarity is provided in the amended package for the zoning bylaw. The OP will not be changed. Pardon me, this isn't required. In discussion with our planning consultant and looking at any guidance, Section 3417 of the Planning Act allows for these kind of changes to be made after the notice to the public meeting, and any indication in terms of council has the ability to make that approval. So I do apologize for that. That's something that should have been caught. I think for the sake of clarity and looking at it in practice, it was good that we had an example, a live example as this was going forward, so that we could provide this clarity before council makes its determination. Pardon me. Sorry about that. So with that, council, through you, your worship, to council and members of the public, there are 6 recommendations in total. This is for report Bill 109 and Bill 23, official plan and zoning bylaw amendments, report file numbers OP802 23 and ZBA 02 23 is what that should say. Recommendations is number 1, that council approves bylaw number 2023-34 to adopt official plan amendment number 14 to the Township of Cavan-Monaghan. Number 2, that council authorized the submission of the adopted official plan amendment to Peterborough County for review and approval. Number 3, that council approve bylaw number 2023-35, a zoning bylaw amendment to implement the policies of official plan amendment number 14 as presented. Number 4, that council approve bylaw number 2023-36 to repeal and replace Township of Cavan-Monaghan official site plan, that should be changed to see Cavan-Monaghan site plan control area bylaw number 2007-20. Number 5, the council approved bylaw 2023-37 to repeal and replace Township of Cavan-Monaghan pre-consultation bylaw number 23-2013 53. And lastly, the council approved bylaw number 2023-38 to repeal and replace Township of Kevin Monaghan delegation to staff bylaw number 2021-64. My apologies. I'm stumbling over this. It's a Monday morning and I should have more sleep than this. What this is this was presented to council May 15th. A lot of information was presented to us. This is the decision point for council with respect to the official plan amendment, zoning bylaw amendment, and the company's selected bylaws that are being outlined for. This is something that the council meeting was May 15th. There were no objections from any of the information we had. There were some points of clarity with respect to one member of the public and also with respect to one of the other people who were attending the meeting who had provided some advice with respect to the pre-consultation in terms of reference with respect to studies. So with that, you have a report. I apologize for my stumbling. I do apologize again for the last minute changes to the zoning bylaw amendment, but that's to provide the clarity where it's required for Bill 23. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to try and answer those as best I can. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Conley. So I believe in order to receive the amended bylaw, we do need a motion to just receive those for our consideration before we get into the rest of the recommendations. Before I'm looking at the clerk, she's nodding her head. So can I have a mover then to receive the amended bylaw number 2023-34 and bylaw number 2023-35 for consideration at this time, just to have it shared with us? We need a motion. Deputy Mayor Huntley. Okay, before the vote, Councilor Byrne has a question.
So these 6 points that you just read out, we're just going to discuss them further, or we're accepting them the way they are? Because I have problems with that.
So right now, we have to have a motion of council to receive what's been amended to then have that consideration. And then we can discuss the rest of the recommendations that still hold. Is that correct, Mr. Conley? Am I canonizing there? That's a nod. That's good enough. We'll take it. Very well. So we're not moving for all these 6. We're moving for a separate motion so that we can receive and consider the adjustments to the amendments to the bylaw for both bylaws. So can I have a mover for that so we can consider those? Councilor Byrne and Councilor Natchoff, all in favor? That is approved. Okay, very good. So now we can ask those sorts of questions with regards to the amendments that are being presented today. So Councilor Byrne, do you have questions?
Yeah, I have some serious concerns about a number of little things tucked in here. And Mr. Conley and I already spoke to some of it, and I tried to address it at the last general meeting. As an elected person and very new to the job and very inefficient at the job, I don't like the idea of delegating authority away from an elected body to a member of staff in whatever capacity. I've listened at the last meeting how there's a emphasis or a case trying to be generated that somehow a deadline set on doing things as far as giving answers to people that come forward from the public to the staff and council to get a decision, that somehow that's going to impact us financially because we're actually going to have to pay out some reimbursement or some penalties or whatever. I still think some of these deadlines are probably reasonable. I'm very new at the job, so I'm going to give it a grain of salt. But once you give away power, getting it back to the elected body, I'm going to guess is almost impossible. And as a representative of people, I think they have a right to have that access, that they have actually some say in how this community moves forward. I have a problem understanding how taking council out of the step somehow inhibits anything. On a 120-day deadline, we meet every 2 weeks. That's like 4 months, twice a month. I don't see how us relinquishing control of what the public has to say to staff helps anything or changes deadline accuracies or whatever. My first official meeting was to do something that had been on the books for over 3 years. Today, we're talking about something that's been in discussion for 5 years. I personally, without very much information on either of our subject, think that's way too much. I don't have a problem with some deadlines being set, but there's several different things in this report where we relinquish the actual elected body of the township say in what happens. And I think that's scary and dangerous. And history has proven that bigger government has never been a good solution.
Yeah, I don't disagree, Councillor Byrne. Unfortunately, we are bound by the province to be consistent with their legislation. And if I'm not sure, but not certain, but I allow Ms. Hurley to maybe comment. I believe all of this delegation is a provincial requirement under this legislation. This isn't a maybe or a could do or a consider. This is a must, if I'm not mistaken. Ms. Hurley?
Through you, Mayor, to council, I believe you are correct, but I would defer to the planners. We have two planners here that have that expertise and the direction that has been provided or given to us by the province.
Who from the planning department would like to take on that mantle? Mr. Connolly.
Through your worship to council and to Council Byrne specifically, the whole notion of delegation is something that's been around for a while. It is provincial law now. The previous council in 2021 had looked at opportunities to be able to streamline delegation to, and what we've done here locally, which is done differently in other jurisdictions, was you may have the director of planning, the head of that department being the delegated authority. What we've done and did in the previous council and did this in 2021 was that we had a number of different applications, straightforward applications, where we were also providing comments to the county for comments on severances, land severance, things like that, consents. Was the idea that our delegation would be the CAO and the designate, that being both of us, not one or the other. So that's how we've done delegation for the last 2 years within the township. The law is now under Bill 23 that this is a power that was taken away by the province. It is no longer the case where it's an authority that council has anymore. It is taken away under Bill 23. That's only for certain things. That's for things with site plan control and some other refinements. The report itself and the delegation doesn't take it away for all things, but it does take away the fact that the provincial legislation has changed to take certain things away from that. Part of the driver is to make quicker decisions. Part of it is also the idea of being able to, when you have a process standpoint, to have decisions made within a fair period of time. So there is the refund aspect to it, but that's not the sole driver. This has been something that for the last 5 years, the idea of looking at different pinch points and approval decision making for land use decisions, delegation has been something that's been there for a while. This is just the next step the province has made with respect to that. And absolutely, I do appreciate from a council member's perspective how this can be challenging and difficult, especially when you're looking at some of these things. But notwithstanding this report, the contents and the intent is to reflect provincial legislation, and on top of that, have our delegation to be with the CEO and myself, whoever's in this role, in order to be able to make sure that we have that two-pronged and controlled approach.
Is that a sufficient answer? A follow-up, Councillor Byrne?
Well, it's an answer I wouldn't consider sufficient, but where does the taxpayer that lives in the township have any say in things if we're handing that over to the provincial government?
Through your worship to Councillor Byrne, I'm not completely sure where you're meaning that, in the sense that I believe this government has decided that what it wants to do in the idea of more homes and building homes faster. That's the legislation that was put forward in this government in its second term, was the idea these are the things that I've identified as streamlining and efficiencies. From a taxpayer's perspective in the macro sense, I think the intent was, where can we look at the land use planning process and be able to achieve some timelines, and time being money, therefore we could do that. So I believe that's probably some of the guiding principle behind the provincial legislation. Locally, we've tried to look at how we do that, but also make sure that there are those controls within the administration here.
Follow-up?
Through you, Chair. So if I understand this right, I'm voting on something today that I have no control over, yes or no answer anyways. You're telling me it's being mandated by the government and this is just a futile discussion?
Through your worship, Councillor Byrne, I wouldn't say it's a futile discussion. I would say that for the purposes of what's in front of you now, these are certain authorities that have been taken away through provincial legislation that will take that and delegate it to staff. It is not outside the local administration, in the sense that those decisions will still be made locally. We're guided by our official plan, our zoning bylaws, all the things that we do for good planning. Notwithstanding that, that'll be done by the CEO and staff, and not by council in these specifically surgical areas.
Deputy Mayor Huntley?
Through you, Chair, just to maybe, for a little context to it is, for the last, for a few years prior to us implementing this streamlining that we already had, our council meetings would have many planning reports that were in for 2 or 3 visits, with no real changes to them. And what we did was we did say, you know what, why do these keep coming to us when all we're doing is slowing it down by 2 weeks at a time, when there's a lot of things that, staff could just approve it and let it go. But if there was any exceptions to it, or if there's, any problem that the applicant had with it, of course it came to council and then we would deal with it. But for the routine stuff, like it's punching money into a pop machine. We don't need to be there to approve it for every one of them. That's why we put that in place. I understand now that the provincial government liked our idea and now they're expanding it. So, but I do believe, Mr. Connolly, if I'm not correct, but anything that's an exception will still have to come back to council to be reviewed.
Yeah, and to that point, Deputy Mayor Huntley, I mean, the one delegation that I can think of was registering like condominium numbers, like the buildings are erected. And yet they would have to come back to 2 different council meetings just to recognize the numbers. Like there was no controls, the buildings are erected, but they're there. Sometimes the tenants are in there. But in the plan of subdivision, the numbers weren't registered. So to come back to 2 different council meetings for a report that is a fait accompli, to just the registration of numbers, that was the level of delegation that we were talking about. We weren't giving away the farm or rescinding control, but for housekeeping components like that, there was just no need to provide that sort of thing. But this is definitely, I agree with Councillor Byrne, it's taking it to another level and a scary level, which is why the advocacy and the components and comments that we have made to the legislation, when we're able to meet those deadlines, is all the more important. I mean, when you ask about what our opportunity is to provide the public comment or represent the public, when it comes to the provincial legislation, the letters of advocacy and responses to the legislation and our comments, that's the opportunity that we're given. It's unfortunate that a lot of those timelines are short and a lot of those legislation approval periods that are usually, between 6 and 12 months are now in some cases 3. So those windows for any sort of comments, whether they're municipal or private or otherwise, are shortening quite tightly. I have Councillor Natchoff and then Councillor Edgerton.
Through you, Chair. I think just to maybe circle back to what Jerry's point was, or Mr. Burns' point to Mr. Connolly, recourse now being that it's law by the province, if our taxpayer constituents are concerned, then this must be raised to their MPPs, not to municipal council.
Fair comment. I'm seeing nods, but yes, that is correct. If you have planning matters, you're always welcome to raise them to your member of provincial parliament. Councillor Edgerton.
And through you, Mr. Mayor, not to repeat the same song that Mr. Burns just gave out, but I 100% agree with what he was saying. Thank you.
There is a consensus. It is a concerning matter, but we will continue to try to do the best we can. Other questions at this time? Otherwise, we are looking for a mover for the recommendations. Councillor Byrne.
Through you, Chair. So I'm assuming from the deputy mayor that we've kind of started this ball rolling and it's just getting bigger and bigger, kind of like a snowball going down the hill idea. That scares the hell out of me. On that note, is this the proper time to ask for a recorded vote if we're going to go on these recommendations?
Yep, we can always ask for a recorded vote, but I think the canonization of us getting this ball rolling is not accurate. There were instances where, for efficiency purposes, that we were told by the province to look for, like I said, registering condominium numbers for a building that's already built is a pretty straightforward one that doesn't certainly need to come to 2 meetings of council. So, but the push or the removal of municipal autonomy has been a steady slope that's right there with downloading fiduciary responsibilities from the province. It's a straight line down. So this has been going on for decades, and this is just the latest, and they're maybe coming a bit more fast and furious. But the reality is we don't have the municipal autonomy. Our policies of managing planning, whether there's zoning bylaws, official plans, or everything therein, have to be consistent with the province. They do not exist, or they are not enforceable without their consistency. So that's just how the cookie crumbles, unfortunately. And, being creatures of the province is having fewer and fewer benefits, but it is the reality that we're working under. So that's all I can say about it. So with that, Recorded vote was requested, so we can move forward with that. If we're clear, we've done that one motion, so we do have, are there any amendments to the sixth? So I'm going to read the motions because I believe there might be some slight adjustments to the language if I'm not mistaken. So that, are these do you have the update? No, okay, never mind. So these are the revised recommendations, so bear with me. That council approved the amended bylaw number 2023-34 to adopt the official plan amendment number 14 to the Township of Cappamonigan, and that council authorized the submission of the adopted official plan amendment to Peterborough County for review and approval. And that council approved the amended bylaw number 2023-35, a zoning bylaw amendment to implement the policies of the official plan amendment number 14 as presented. And that council approved bylaw number 2023-36 to repeal and replace the Township of Cavan Millbrook North Monaghan Site Plan Control Area bylaw number 2007-20, and that council approved the bylaw number 2023-37 to repeal and replace the Township of Cappamonigan pre-consultation bylaw number 2013-53, and that council approved bylaw number 2023-38 to repeal and replace Township of Cappamonigan delegation to staff bylaw number 2021-64. Those are the recommendations before us, and a recorded vote has been requested. Oh, yeah, sorry, I need a mover and a seconder before we can do the recorded. Councillor Natchoff, Deputy Mayor Huntley, and now we will go to a recorded vote.
Deputy Mayor Huntley,
Yes.
Councillor Edgerton,
No.
Mayor Graham,
Yes.
Councillor Byrne,
Respectively, no.
Councillor Natchoff,
Yes.
That vote is carried. Thank you, everyone. I understand the contrary votes, and we'll hopefully continue to advocate with the province to hopefully give us some autonomy over the things we're trying to manage in the township. Moving on, we are at 10.6, report Parks and Facilities 2023-03, Parks and Recreation Plan Vision 23, Community Forum. Chris, you are taking the lead on this report, sir.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I have before you Parks and Facilities Report 2023-03, Parks and Recreation Plan Vision 2035, Community Forum, and Millbrook Arena. The recommendations are that council provide direction to staff regarding the future use of the Millbrook Arena property, and that council's direction be carried forward in phase 2 of the Parks and Recreation Plan Vision 2035. The Rethink Group reached out to Basterfield and Associates to provide some additional park costs to better understand what park development could possibly cost. The high-level budget cost estimate provided in this report for the lands that currently house the Millbrook Arena were based on the conceptual design from the 2013 Downtown Revitalization Strategy. The high-level order of magnitude costing estimate for a downtown park at the arena site is estimated at plus or minus $1,105,000 and could vary between 25 and 35% based on design and materials. We do have Mr. Lockhart with us today who can help answer any questions related to the May 10th Community Forum hosted by the Rethink Group and information about the Millbrook Arena emanating from the Parks and Recreation Plan.
Thank you, Chris. So this report is before council. There's a number, so there isn't a lot of direction for the recommendation, but we have been great discussions about this. I know a number of councilors were in attendance for the additional public meeting to discuss these opportunities, and that information is also in the report. Is there any questions for Chris, or as mentioned, Robert Lockhart is here, so he can answer any of those questions. Councilor Byrne.
Through the chair to Robert, on the report from the meeting that night, there was 28 in attendance. 3 went online and 2 submitted, or was it 2 online and 3 submitted? And I was trying to figure out the bullet points on the report. In the left column, I'm guessing that's the number of people that voted in favor of a bullet point. And I was wondering why on the last page, there was some bullet points that had no reference to the number of people that maybe voted for it.
Councilor, can you indicate which pages you're referencing, just for all of us to follow along? Sorry.
Okay, so you, Mr. Chair, Councilor Byrne, I'm not quite sure where you are and which report you're speaking to. Is it the community forum report or is it the? Okay, through you, Mr. Chair. So 28 residents attended the event, and there were a number that were on live streamed onto it. I think it was around 8, but I'm not sure. Can't remember the exact number now that was that joined online. There would be some clarification, I'm sure, from staff around that. But don't remember the exact number.
Deputy Mayor Huntley?
It's through you, Chair, to Mr. Lockhart. I think what Jerry's question is more what is under requests, the 5, the 4 in that column. What is that number referring to? Can you clarify that the number under the request column?
Okay, through you, Mr. Mayor. That question, that was simply one of the first questions we asked in the discussion group, and it was about your top 2 or 3 priorities for improvement or new facilities. And so the number of people who suggested that, in total, among all the people who were there were 5 people suggested the first one about the trail system, and so on all the way down. So that is the number of people who actually selected that particular item as their first or second choice. So that's all that refers to. It's just a number. So when you look at the last one, there was a whole list of things that only one person suggested, but in total, it added up to that full list. So it wasn't any one particular group. It was aggregated together to give us the answer to that question.
Councilor Byrne?
Through you, Chair. Yes, I was just trying to ascertain if those bullet points, I was trying to figure out the numbers of the actual people that were there and the ones that emailed in and put their vote in, how that equated out. Because there was more bullet points when I was looking at this, not knowing which column meant what. Just trying to ascertain. Okay.
If I'm not mistaken, I think the further down, there's a more granular summary of the votes that were cast from that survey. If you go down a couple more pages. Yes, so I think that better encompasses what you're looking for rather than this ranking system, if I'm not mistaken, but I'll be corrected, Mr. Lockhart.
Through you, Chair. There were 2 questions asked, of course. The first one was your top 2 or 3 thoughts about new parks and facilities, improvements facilities. The second question was about the options for the future of the Millbrook Arena. That's a completely different discussion group. And what you're seeing here is looking at the votes that people offered around their choices, how that turned out. So you can look at option number 1. It was 10.7% of the votes cast, and option number 2 there was 0, and so on and so on and so on. So that's how that one related. It's a little bit different from the list of facilities and park improvements that people would want to see as question 1. This was question 2, and it was the discussion and voting process relating to the various options for the future of the arena. So there are 2 separate questions and recorded slightly differently to get us at the numbers we have here.
Other questions? Seeing none. Is anyone prepared to make a motion or have entertain motions if there's no other questions for either Chris or Robert at this time? I don't see a lot of hands. So in reviewing the report, I mean, again, thank you, Robert, for the additional public inquiry. I think it was a really important step to give another opportunity for individuals to participate. So first and foremost, thank you for facilitating that. I think it was important, and I think it also reinforced the findings of the survey in the lion's share, which was, I think, something in the realm of 80% of support for the one option. And this is almost slightly lower, but from a far smaller number. So, 75% fairly consistent. So if no one has something that comes to mind, I have a couple ideas with regards to a comprehensive motion. Just so it's reflected, because we're not given a lot of direction here. So the motion would be something to the effect that staff be directed to commence planning for the creation of a community park on the Millbrook Arena lands, with a secondary portion that the existing users of the Millbrook Arena be permitted to continue the existing uses of the facility in its current state until the final plans for the community park are approved by council, or that the facility becomes unusable due to health and safety concerns. So it's a two-part motion, one that sustains the existing users for as long as possible, given two considerations that we're being aware of. But also, we give clear direction to move forward with the plans for a community park, as generic as that can be, and we'll see that as we move forward. So that's a motion. So before we have a conversation about the motion, we do need a mover and a seconder. So I'm obviously the mover, putting forward and a seconder, Deputy Mayor Huntley. So then we can have a conversation about that motion. Okay, Councilor Byrne, do you want to start? Yeah.
Yes, one of the things that I'm disturbed about the most is the approach. Even that night at that open forum, which I had no problem with as far as holding it, that's great. But there was a real emphasis at the end of the night before anybody moved from one table to the other to kind of steer the conversation towards what was already hoped for. At no point has anybody actually approached the reality that we as a township do not have to spend $5 million to keep that old arena functioning. And I get that it's running at a loss maybe per year, and I get that maybe it's under capacity. That being said, it's still a lot of demand. And if we look by the same parameters, the new hockey rink at the top of the hill isn't fully utilized and is costing the taxpayers annually. Neither one do I have a big concern with because of the need and the use of it. One thing I would like to ask, and maybe Robert can, one of the things that came up over this last 4 days, looking at this stuff, really to come on board for 2025, I was trying to go through some of the regulations for accessibility that everybody keeps throwing out as a major problem. I don't really see that. We need push buttons for some of the doors. The doors are large enough. What we actually only need, I think, from my limited perspective, is a washroom that can be used for either sex, male or female, that's handicapped equipped with push buttons, fountains, shelving, railings, whatever. What my question would be today is that possible to buy a modular handicap washroom, probably made out of steel or aluminum, that we could have inside that old Millbrook Arena, that at any point down the road, I'm not stupid enough to think this arena is going to last forever. I just see a need for it. So if we were to spend money on getting accessible, I think that's the biggest handicap, is a washroom. If we could buy a modular washroom that could be installed in there and just hooked up to the permanent plumbing, and then whatever point down the road after I'm gone as a counselor, they decide to do something that maybe it would be useful in the next step.
I'm not sure, Mr. Lockhart, are you familiar with modular washroom technology, or should we maybe discuss if planning's aware? I'm not sure.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Byrne, you're out of my purview of expertise here. This would be a question to ask the engineers and architects who looked at the building and provided some direction to staff most recently about what it would take to keep it going even for a few more years, including the minimum level of accessibility improvements that would have to be made to it. I know the thought was to not use the second floor, so even keeping it used in the main floor only, recommendations came back about what the minimum requirements would be to meet the interior requirements for accessibility for that building. So I don't know what all the details were of that. I know washrooms would be one, easily accessible doors would be another, but there were other things as well. And I don't know what they all are, but they were in it certainly more than a washroom. So I'd have to defer to staff if they have any more information on that to back up those minimum requirements.
Yeah, and maybe for point of clarity, Ms. Hurley, the 5.25 million was a very rough engineering estimate that did not encompass or include accessibility renovations whatsoever. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I think, correct Chris has some more information. I think it's, I will defer to him to allow him to share that information that we have had. These numbers were based on a very high estimate, and you are correct. You could pick and choose what you choose to do. If council chose to keep the Millbrook Arena open for a certain period of time and wanted to bring it to some type of accessibility standard, depending upon whether it's customer service counter, whether it's the reception, whether it's washrooms, whether it's the front door. We did explore some options on what those costs are. But as we've presented all along, these are very high estimated costs if you renovated the entire facility, not just a portion of it. So we did go ahead and get some additional costs, and maybe it would be best for Chris to sort of answer some of that questions.
Mr. Allison.
Through you, Mayor to Council, we have received some more information. BBA has supplied high-level budgetary numbers based on the previous investigation, reporting general understanding of the building, any high priority repairs that should be required over the next few years, and a cost estimate. Based on BBA's previous investigation, they recommend that higher priority be given to repairing the following items: interior and exterior masonry at areas at risk of falling failure, localized repairs to damaged pre-engineered frame strut, short anchor bolts, repair, replace of damaged guardrail within foyer, repairs, replacement of second floor access stairs and rails. Construction costs for this work could range between $100,000 and $150,000, depending on the remedial repair details. Thoughts on the cost to deal with mold and replace insulation in the ceilings. Estimated construction cost to remediate the mold is between $110,000 and $215,000. With respect to replacing the insulation, this would likely need to happen as part of a large-scale project addressing the roof leaks leading to the moisture and mold buildup. This project would likely generally include the following: demolition of existing roof assembly and arena roof liner system, construction of new roof assembly, including insulation and exterior side of the roof deck, construction of new second floor ceiling and arena roof liner system. Estimated construction cost to complete this work would be between $600,000 and $750,000. Total estimate to remediate mold, address roof installation system, replace ceiling, $710,000 to $965,000. With regards to the accessibility, how much of the estimated $800,000 for accessibility upgrades would be required if the upstairs is sealed off to the public? The estimated cost for accessibility upgrades, excluding the second floor, which would be a lift or an elevator, would still be $645,000. With regards to accessibility, there's accessibility issues with parking, with ramps, doors, frames, hardware, operators, signage, elevator, clear aisles, universal barrier-free washrooms.
Thanks, Chris. A lot of money, but nice to have a more accurate. I mean, I know the 5.25 was very kind of abstract number at a very high level, but that seems like a much more granular, understandable number. Still a significant investment for a facility that I don't think is going to meet the future and immediate future needs. And it certainly seems as though there was a lot of representation from the user groups, and it's not well used, and it only is used for a few months. And there wasn't a lot of advocacy that I heard from those groups about, suggesting that it needs to stay open, partially, I think, because it was always an interim usage solution. It was always, even the turf that we purchased at a discount was a limited lifespan that was going to not pass more than 5 years of usage. I think probably because they're little kids playing soccer, they're not as hard on it as the lacrosse guys used to be. But anyways, it's always been an interim solution, and I think it's been great and it's been helpful to hopefully move forward with future recreational enhancements throughout the township. So it's definitely highlighted an opportunity that can certainly be better fielded by, unintended, by a better facility that's going to meet the future needs of the community. And we've already seen some of the community interests or some of those auxiliary locations. But anyways, so there is a motion on the floor. Other comments with regards to the motion? Deputy Mayor Huntley.
Through you, Chair, I think we've been, sorry. Through you, Chair. We've been kind of, at the point where we need to make a decision on this building for a while now, and we keep kicking it down the road. And I think we've heard from the public, we've heard from user groups, we've heard from enough people to know that, the opinion is that that building is tired. And nobody wants council to continue to pour more money into a building with no real return left on it. And I think this is a great point to now, put that one to bed. Like, let's make a decision on this building. As the recommendation is, let's move on and figure out what we can do in the future, not how we try to keep this past alive. So, just my stance. Thank you.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor Huntley. Other questions before we go for a vote on the motion on the floor? Councilor Byrne?
On that note, I hear a lot of talk from residents that live in the township that feel differently than Deputy Mayor. And to Robert's point, I don't have the expertise either. I went old school. So during the month of April, we had probably 3 weekends where it rained steady, not downpours, but steady. I took it upon myself to go down through and walk the old Millbrook Arena after each day, looking for any sign of water in any of the garbage pails or anywhere on the walls, anywhere on the floor, back in the electrical room, upstairs on the plastic in the ceiling in the washroom that's no longer used. I could find nothing any of the times that I went down that actually indicated that. I asked at one point that maybe the township has a high-end drone that we could videotape it, so I'd have a better understanding. And I was told that wasn't necessary because you'd hired a consultant and a construction team to do that. So I went upon myself to get another private person to do it for me. I don't, with my limited knowledge and expertise, haven't found a case to say that roof is that bad a repair that it needs $500,000 in reconstruction costs. I don't think, to Chris's point, there's been speculation that maybe that shield that hangs underneath the steel roof in the center of the arena might have some problems with it. But I think, from what I understood, nobody's physically gone up and looked at it. And I'm not sure at this point in time, for my level of expertise, that the rain is permeating in from outside, that it's not just condensation from a steel building in cold weather, creating frost, which melts off and comes down. Whether there's mold or mildew up there, I have no idea. But I just think that when it's said and done, this motion here doesn't leave the flexibility to even talk about anything other than the green park idea. And today I find out that the 40-foot or whatever the road allowance is on Ann Street is so valuable. I wonder how valuable that real estate is where the Millbrook Arena sits, because I found out here at the public meeting a week and a bit ago that we still have the flexibility to sell that to somebody to do something with, that it doesn't necessarily have to be the green park. And that's the way I kind of read this motion, that we go right from what we have today to this not kick it down the road approach, and we're going to go to this green park, and that the residents of the township, not just of Millbrook, have some voice in whether that's the way they want to go. If there's a referendum or something publicly to the entire township, and I know there's a lot of reluctance that says nobody ever shows up, nobody ever cares, or all the rest of it. I think there is a lot of people out there that are very interested, and I don't think there's as much support for this green park idea. I looked at some of the plans. I don't understand how you're going to get the parking that you want for the downtown Millbrook area. And I look at it from the perspective that we have a lot of green area to the east of that pond already, up that hill that they call the mountain, and we're not utilizing it, and we haven't utilized it for years. So that being said, way back when there was parkland down where the arena was a long time ago, but not overly used either. So I'm just asking right now, is this motion telling me that I'm voting on, we're going to a green park? Are we voting on keeping this arena functioning until somewhere down the road where there's an option? Or are we ruling out the idea that we could sell that land at a high value for the township, like we were thinking about doing with the road allowance? I just want to know what I'm voting on.
Sure, I can clarify the motion. So the option to dispose of the property was something that was captured in the public correspondence and received, I think, almost the second least support maybe third. It's very close. So there was no support to sell it to developer to do that. With regards to, I don't think it has any bearing on the usage of this property or the valuation of it to the previous discussion because it was completely separate entity. A street allowance and a road allowance is not a recreational consideration. They're completely separate. Again, I tried to leave the floor open for people to make a motion and there was no opportunity. So based on the correspondence that we've received, the work that Robert's done, whose report also suggests that there is a need for more green space in the village. There isn't a plan that I'm aware of that's been developed by Robert or by staff in any capacity of how or what will be included in the community park. That will be something that needs to be commenced, hence the commence planning for the creation of a community park. We are not bound by anything that has been floated or any sort of postulations that other private members of representatives from groups or private citizens have ever made. We are still starting carte blanche with the community plans for this green space. But we have been consulting the public and we've gone above and beyond countless times to engage them on this. We've engaged with the user groups who are the primary users of the facility who don't all live in the village, who live all over the township, and they've reinforced the support for this sort of moving forward. Hence making the postulation with regards to the motion before us now. So we have, Chris, was there anything about the components of the comments that you'd like to make at this time? Give you that opportunity.
No, I think we're good.
Ms. Hurley?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to council. The cost that we put forward for the park at this time was based, and I just want to clarify, was based on a design that was done for the downtown revitalization back in 2013. It doesn't mean that that has been, that design, I see the picture is out there a few times. And that design through downtown revitalization, the project was supported by council at the time, but it doesn't mean that those items were just, they were only through that process. That doesn't mean that if you wanted to do some type of park development, what that park development is going to look like. You have the option to consider what that park would look like, as well as the public for have more input on what that park design. We just took that as, we had one document that actually showed a redesign and what that redesign would look like downtown, from the downtown revite. And with Mr. Baskerville, we just basically got an estimate of what a park costs. No matter what we do, it's going to cost, right? No matter what, whether you tear down the facility, whether you renovate a portion of the facility, or you do any works on a facility, whether you develop a park, whether you don't develop it, everything you decide will cost some type of fiscal budgetary item and moving forward for the future plan for the municipality. So.
Thanks, Ms. Hurley. Councillor Natshaw?
Through you, Chair, just to speak from my own experience, having since being elected councillor, I've had the opportunity to speak with hundreds of people, constituents, in primarily my Ward 3, but in addition, through my business, I've had people within the township coming to speak with me. And overwhelmingly, the support has been in favor of not continuing to fund the building at a loss as it has been. In addition, I know, I would say well over 75%, maybe even over 80% of the people that I've spoken with share that position. And given the options that were available as well, an overwhelmingly large support has been in favor of the community park or something thereof, in that opinion. So just to give you a kind of an understanding, maybe in a bigger numbered picture than just the people that have completed the survey and the people that attended the other night.
Sorry, Rod, you cannot speak. Sorry, apologies. This is a formal meeting. I'm sorry, Mr. Duke. Councillor Byrne.
Through you, Chair. In all fairness, to the CAO's point, during any of those presentations or any of the documentations, the only number of costs really put forward at the beginning, and they started to gradually creep out, was the high cost of maintaining the arena in Millbrook to the level of something for the next 25 years, which was my opening comment. It really doesn't reflect what we're up against right now. And apparently, I don't know, I don't appear to be as stupid as some people think, but I know the difference between a road allowance and down there. I was trying to emphasize how the cost of things have gone dramatically high and the value of things have appreciated drastically high. That was the only reason I was making the correlation. So that being said, yes, I leave it at that.
Very good. So there is a motion on the floor. I don't see any other hands, so we can call for the vote. Who was the mover and seconder? Sorry, did I get that? Very good. Okay, very good. I can read the motion again. So we're not exclusively. So we're saying that staff be directed to commence planning for the creation of a community park on the Millbrook Arena lands, and that the existing users of the Millbrook Arena be permitted to use the existing facility in its current state until the final plans for the community park are approved by council, or that the facility becomes a health and safety concern. So continue to use it for as long as it exists until the plans are finalized. And then, so call for the vote. All in favor?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I just want to confirm to Ms. Hurley or to Mr. Allison, do we need to include recommendation number 2 as well with the other 2 recommendations of the mayor's added? Okay, perfect. So that would be the 3.
So there are 3 recommendations before us, and we will call for the recorded vote. Does anyone want me to read that number 2 recommendation? Okay, Councilor Byrne.
Through you, Chair, is there any conflict at all with Councillor Natchoff and his business affecting this at all, or I don't know?
Nope, no, I don't believe so. Thank you.
Councillor Byrne,
No.
Mayor Graham,
Yes.
Councillor Edgerton,
No.
Councillor Natchoff,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Huntley.
Yes.
That vote is approved. Good discussion, everyone, and thank you, Mr. Lockhart, for all your work on this. That concludes that portion of the meeting. So now we are on 10.7 council committee and verbal reports. I didn't hear from anyone about a verbal report. Deputy Mayor Huntley?
Through you, Chair, I did want to report that we did have the kickoff to summer for event this weekend in downtown Millbrook with the BIA. It was first event by our new board. It's fairly well attended and it's a great start, and now commence with summer.
The official kickoff. Very good. Oh, sorry, Deputy Mayor.
Follow up to that is I did want to commend staff in all of their participation on that day. They were fantastic to work with. They're on top of everything. And they were, it was fantastic. Thank you very much. And please extend that to your staff.
Yeah, it was a great event. I was happy to be there. Deputy Mayor, sorry, Councillor Natchoff.
Thank you, Chair. As a business owner, I'd like to as well echo the same sentiments. It was very well organized, well attended. People had a really enjoyable time. I thought it showcased the great things that the community is doing. And so thank you once again. Looking forward to the next event. And then just as my report, we were not able to have quorum for our latest meeting for the Ganaraska Regional, or I'm sorry, for the Millbrook Valley Trails. So we weren't able to have a meeting. So our next meetings were next month, or this month.
Thank you, Councillor Natchoff. The only other committee verbal report, actually, it's not a committee report, but I have 2 items for general business, so I'll speak to it then. Any other verbal reports while we're on the floor? If not, we'll accept a motion to receive those council and committee verbal reports. Councillor Byrne, Deputy Mayor Huntley, all in favor? That is approved. Does anyone else have items for general business? So there's 2. One is on a very happy note and the other is unfortunately quite somber, but Councillor Byrne and myself attended a anniversary of the 200th anniversary of the Stewart family at 400 Stewart Line on Sunday. And it was just a very positive and wonderful celebration of a long-serving family, 200 years of their anniversary being a part of the township. So it was an honor to be there, and both Jerry and I, listened to the stories and the history and the explanations, and it was just great to see, so many variations of a family that's been such a part of this community for so long to be celebrated. So, we did present on behalf of council a certificate commemorating the event, and which was very well received, and they were very appreciative for all of council that Mr. Byrne and I represented that day. So thanks for that. Unfortunately, a bunch more somber note. We found out this morning that a former staff member, Jerry Barker, has tragically passed away. Jerry worked for the township for 7 years as our Parks and Facilities manager before his retirement in 2020. He was, a very, very well-liked individual, a very caring and lovely man, and was very instrumental and helpful in bringing the CMC to fruition. And so we already miss Jerry, but we will miss him even more, and our thoughts and condolences go out to his family at this very difficult time. So we do remember you, Jerry, very fondly, and we thank you for all your contributions to the community. And very, very sad day for all of us. So with that, we'll look for a mover to receive that general business comments. Deputy Mayor Huntley, Councilor Byrne, all in favor. That is approved. Correspondence for information. There are a number of items for information below. So if there's any comments with regards to the items, we have one, that the notice of intention to repeal and replace the sections of the Heritage Designation bylaw for 2 Hay Street. So that council received the notice of intention to repeal the sections of the Heritage Designation bylaw for 2 Hay Street for information with no objections and content to the proposed bylaw. Looking for a mover. Deputy Mayor Huntley, Councilor Natchoff, all in favor. That is approved. We also have a letter from Mr. Rod Dew that council received a note of thanks regarding his ditching and excellent work of Public Staff Department for information. Can I get a mover to receive that? Deputy Mayor Huntley and Councilor Byrne, all in favor? That is also approved. Correspondence for action. There is a letter requesting the community hall fee be waived from the Fourth Line Theater. Who would like to, is this a member of staff going to speak to this, or they just want council to make a decision? I know we have a user fee in bylaws, and I wondered if one member of staff could speak to the consideration of this in the context of the bylaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, to council. So our current user fee and bylaw does allow for the CAO to basically waive for not-for-profits. However, during past experiences, it's always best that council makes those decisions, and somehow we do waive certain fees when it comes to committees of council, for example, but when it comes to the outside area, I do believe it's best that council makes those decisions just with regards to past experience.
So for the sake of efficiencies, they are a registered not-for-profit, so they are eligible for this consideration under the bylaw. How would council like to proceed? Anyone willing to make a motion? Oh, yeah, a question, Councilor Byrne?
Through you, Chair. Just a point of interest. The Fourth Line Theater, did it purchase the old tinny house on the southwest corner of the intersection? And is that through the profits they're making down at the Fourth Line Theater on a regular basis?
I don't believe we have that information or are eligible or possible that we divulge that information about a transaction. It's not really our jurisdiction between private entities, so we can't really comment on that. So sorry, I just don't think that I'm not aware of it, but I also don't think it's appropriate to discuss an open session. Councilor Natchoff?
Through you, Chair, just because it's not listed in this letter, can you please tell us what the cost of the fees would be that we would be waiving?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I believe it's 500, Madam Clerk, it was 500 and some dollars. Can you just clarify that for me?
For clarification to council, it would be $532.81 per booking. So that would be ×2.
Councilor Edgerton and then Deputy Mayor Huntley.
To you, Mr. Mayor. I think we're trying to run our community thing and make it pay for itself. And I think we're running a fine line here between profitable business and non-profitable business. So my recommendation would be that we charge the fee. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor?
Through you, Chair. In the past, we used to actually give money to the Fourth Line Theater as part of our community grants, other channels, and became a regular contributor and a supporter of the Fourth Line Theater. The Fourth Line Theater obviously helps put Millbrook on the map, and we have not been giving them any money in past years. So it's, to me, this is an easy way to contribute to their success. Doesn't really cost us a whole lot because it's not like we're kicking somebody out of the room for them to use it. It does cost us space, time, and staff, but it's kind of an indirect compensation to them. And in recognition, they will provide us, with written and, an ad for the township. And I think it's a win-win for both the Fourth Line Theater and for the township. So I absolutely believe we should waive those fees.
Chris, just a point of clarity, if I could, do you know or aware of any bookings that might conflict or might otherwise, compete with this request for these dates? Just offhand, I'm sorry to catch you out of the wind on that one.
Through you, Mayor, to yourself. Right now, we do not have any other bookings at that time.
Thank you through you, Chair. Having previously worked for Fourth Line Theater as both a marketing and revenue development, as of 2013 in my last year through RTO 8, they attributed roughly $8 million Fourth Line Theater brought to our community, not specifically to Millbrook, but the township and surrounding Peterborough areas through visits, restaurants, hotel stays, gas, visiting other attractions in the community. I could only assume that that being the case, the money that they bring to the community is probably significantly increased in the last 10 years. I know during my time there that the previous councils had yearly supported the theater, and having spoken with Kim Blackwell, the managing director, and Robert Winslow, since COVID's come in, roughly 60% of all outdoor summer theaters in Ontario have permanently closed. So the monies that would be provided to support Fourth Line and the residual benefits that the township receives back are immeasurable. And as well as a business owner, just having people telling me that they specifically come to visit our Millbrook and Cavan Monaghan to see the theater, numbers in the hundreds of, if not thousands of people that I've experienced over the time that we've had our store. And as well, they are always looking for additional entertainment and accommodations in the immediate communities. So what would normally be maybe an afternoon visit and a theater stay could be an overnight stay, and thus putting even more money into the community. So my suggestion would be to, since we are not yearly funding them as we previously did, to support this.
I believe Ms. Pope would like to comment. Ms. Pope?
Thank you. Through you, Mayor, to all of council. Just for clarification, if you do end up waiving the fee for the nonprofit, because this came in place during a time when we were fundraising for a piece of equipment, or not we, the fire services group was funding for a piece of equipment. Wording was placed in there that if there's any benefit or any revenues raised at the particular event, that money would come back to the municipality for all ratepayers. And it was under those conditions. So I'd just like to read to you just the 2-line sentence that does, so you're fully aware that if you are doing that, this is what's happening, because I don't necessarily see there that they're raising funds, but if they were to do that, just so that we're clear right from the get-go. So it says that a not-for-profit organization may request the waiving of a user fee or charge as outlined in the current user fees and charges bylaw, providing the funds from the public activity, event, or function will be transferred to the municipality for the benefit of all ratepayers. A written request must be submitted to the CAO for approval in advance of the activity, event, or function, with the details of the anticipated funds and the purpose of those funds being transferred to the municipality. So if you do waive under the non-profit and they do run an event to raise funds, the intent is those funds would come back to the municipality, unless council, of course, were to override that, but that's the provision that's in there today.
Just to clarify, the intention in the user fee bylaw was to permit not-for-profits to the fees be waived under the circumstance or the onus that there was a fundraising activity for community benefit to occur during the event. So, which I haven't read anything in here to lead to believe that that is what's occurring at this point. Okay, but thanks for that clarity, Ms. Pope. Councilor Natchok.
Thank you again, Chair. Through you, just to speak to the point that Ms. Pope just made, in my experience previously with Fourth Line, no charges were, no monies were raised. All of this was at the expense of the theater to celebrate the actors, all of the volunteer younger youth, and as well, their family members. So at no time was any revenue on behalf of Fourth Line generated. It was strictly a 100% operating expense as a thank you to each play and the participants in the play. If that's changed, I would be very surprised. It's always been at least that a celebration for the actors and their families.
Okay, well, it seems like there's a fair division here. For the sake of compromise, I mean, they do allude to the fact that there's an opportunity to consider a special prorated discount, and council has complete freedom to provide such direction. I mean, at the 1032, I think it, or at the 532, I think it works out to 1064 for the 2 nights. If you wanted to offer one free or some sort of discount, we have that flexibility, but at the end of the day, we do need a motion because this is requiring action from council. Deputy Mayor Hunt.
Through you, Chair, I will make the motion that we do support this, but I did also want to point out that I believe their full page ad is actually worth more than $1,000. So the retribution that we're getting from them is more than we're giving to them in this case. Although both are fairly intangible, but that being said, I do support the letter and I do think we should go ahead and grant them the room.
That sounded like a motion, Deputy Mayor Huntley. So there is one motion. Does he have a seconder? Councillor Natchoff. Oh, we are time. Any comments or questions on the motion? Seeing none, we will go ask for a vote. All those in favor? That is approved. Very good. Thank you, council. Staff will send that letter accordingly. Moving on. So you're going to have to bear with me because there's a lot of bylaws. So I will try to read them accurately and as quickly as possible. The bylaw is bylaw number 2023-34, OPA number 140223. Be read. Oh, sorry. Oh, I've already gone wrong. There you go. That the amended bylaw number 2023-34, OPA number 1402-23, and amended bylaw number 2023-35, ZBA number 140223, and bylaw number 2023-36, being a bylaw to designate the township of Cavan-Monaghan as a site plan control area, and that bylaw number 2023-37, being a bylaw to require the pre-consultation on certain planning applications in the township of Cavan-Monaghan, and that bylaw number 2023-38 being a bylaw to delegate to staff certain authorities set out in the Planning Act, and that bylaw number 2023-39 being a bylaw to provide for the adoption of the levy and to provide for the adoption of tax rates and to further provide for a penalty and interest and default payment thereof for 2023, and that bylaw number 2023-40 being a bylaw to provide the adoption of special services levy, and that bylaw number 2023-41 being a bylaw to provide for the levy and collection of special charges for the year 2023 in respect of the business improvement area, and that bylaw number 2023-42 being a bylaw to adopt official plan amendment number 13 Kennedy, and that bylaw number 2023-43 being a bylaw to adopt a zoning bylaw amendment for OPA number 13 Kennedy, and that bylaw number 2023-44 being a bylaw to authorize the execution of a merger agreement between Cavan Agri Services Incorporated, applicant, Can Agri Service Inc., purchaser, and the corporation of the township of Cavan-Monaghan be read a first, second, and third time and passed this 5th day of June, signed by the mayor and the clerk, and the corporate seal attached thereto. Looking for a mover for those bylaws, Councillor Natchoff and Councillor Edgerton. All in favor? That is approved. There is no unfinished business. I don't see any notices of motion. Seeing none, we now have the confirming bylaw being bylaw number 2023-45, being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the meeting held this June 5th, 2023. Be read a first, second, and third time, passed this 5th day of June, signed by the mayor and clerk, and the corporate seal attached thereto. Mover for the confirming bylaw, Councillor Natchoff and Deputy Mayor Huntley. All in favor? That is approved. Looking for a motion to adjourn. Councillor Natchoff, Deputy Mayor Huntley, all in favor? That is approved. We have a number of upcoming events, most notably the 172nd Annual Fair taking place this weekend from Thursday over to Sunday. We hope everyone has a safe and happy time at the fair. It's great to see it back up and running, and it's going to be a great event as it always is. The Municipal Revitalization and Heritage Advisory Committee meeting is Thursday, June 15th, 2023 at 9 a.m. in the council chambers. The Sustainability and Advisory Committee meeting is Tuesday, June 20th, 2023 at 1 p.m. in the council chambers. The Cavan-Monaghan Public Library Board meeting is Tuesday, June 20th at 7 PM at the Millbrook branch of the library. The Water Wastewater Master Servicing Plan Notice of Public Information Center Class Environmental Assessment is Wednesday, June 21st at 4 PM in the council chambers. Our next regular council meeting is Monday, June 26th, 2023 at 1 PM. The Millbrook Valley Trails Advisory Committee meeting is Monday, June 26th on 4 PM. And the Canada Day celebration is going to be held at the Cavan Monaghan Community Center on Saturday, July 1st from 11 AM to 2 PM. And then the subsequent regular council meeting is August 14th at 1 PM here in the council chambers. We'll see you all later.